and pass the quote microphone off to you guys.
Okay, great. And Eleise, I'm going to go ahead and start up the slide here.
And Eleise, heads up, it looks like you might be muted. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Keith.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank the Aurora History Museum, and a special thanks to everyone who has joined us here online. We really do appreciate you joining in with us. My colleague here and my sister in history is Linda Burke-Brown. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in African American Studies. And as I said earlier, we eat, sleep, and drink history. It is a passion of ours. My name is Eleise Clark. We are both board members with the Black American West Museum. We are also part of the Jane Taylor Reenactors Guild, and we reenact historical characters from the past. And so we're just happy to be here. Women have served as pawns, as diplomatic and building nations for centuries. The uniting of marriages created nations, and some of those marriages also destroyed nations. So women have much power. And I'd like to present to you now African American suffrage movement in the West. We will also be dealing with the general suffrage movement in the United States and worldwide, actually, in some instances. I don't see it.
Okay. Do you all see the presentation, the slides?
I don't.
Okay.
I think you might need to share your screen at the bottom there, that green button.
Yes, let's see if we can do. Okay, and let's
That looks like it's doing it.
There we go.
Yep.
There we go. Okay.
All right.
I love this. Okay. Okay.
All right. The American suffrage movement in the West. Like I said, women, what is the suffrage movement? What is suffrage? Suffrage is described as a political franchise. It is appeal for the right to vote. It is a movement for social reforms. American women organized groups to challenge the status quo. Next. Okay. A lot of us know these two ladies here. They are early leaders in the suffrage movement. What you might not realize is how they came about this. In 1840, the newlywed Stantons attended the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London, England. Elizabeth Cady Stanton met Lucretia Mott, a founder and a delegate for the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. During the first few days of the convention, the male delegates debated whether or not women should take part. After the women were excluded, Mott and Stanton decided that women should have a role in abolition and women's role in society. So they planned to hold a convention about women's rights when they returned to America. 8 years later, in 1848, in Seneca Falls, New York, the women established a broad-based demand for economic and political and social equality. Growing out of the anti-slavery movement, they also enlisted abolitionists such as Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass and Anna Julia Cooper to aid them in this endeavor. They were inclusive from the start. Many African Americans participated in this because there was a dual purpose here. Both were disenfranchised, women and African American slaves. We were property, so we had much in common. Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth joined in this endeavor. Frederick Douglass attended the Seneca meeting and was called to promote the cause of women's suffrage in his newspaper, the North Star. He played a central role at the Women's Rights Convention, supporting Elizabeth Cady Stanton's insistence on the inclusion of a demand for women's suffrage in the Declaration of Sentiment. The slogan, which appeared in every issue of the North Star, reflected Douglass's lifelong belief that right is of no sex. Sojourner Truth is most known for her "Ain't I a Woman" speech, and most notably this quote: "If the first woman God made was so strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they is asking to do it. The men better listen." Women were in leading roles and making the charge. The impact of African American women in the suffrage movement cannot be ignored. Some of the images shown here are of famous women that most of us can recognize, while other images of these women are lesser known. Women such as Ida B. Wells and Sojourner Truth and Natty Burroughs are well-known names. In this presentation, we will introduce you to women of Colorado who were instrumental in the success of achieving the right to vote. Colorado women got the right to vote in 1893. If we look at these photos, we have Frances Ellen Watkins. We have Anna Julia Cooper in the middle. And on the right upper, we have Ida B. Wells. She wrote many papers on lynching of Black citizens in America. On the bottom row, we have Sojourner Truth. In the middle, we have Natty Burroughs. And we have Elizabeth Piper Ensley. Anna Hayward Julia Cooper. Anna Julia Cooper was born into slavery in Raleigh, North Carolina. She graduated from St. Augustine Normal School in that city in 1869. She began school at the age of 9. Mathematics and science were her strongest subject. At a young age, Anna recognized that young women were treated different than the boys at the school. While attending school, she confronted her principal and complained only boys were taught Latin and the classics, while adolescent girls were forbidden to take these classes. The principal's reply was, "Women do not need to know the classics because they are only going to get married, raise children, and cook and clean." Anna never forgot those words, and her future writings reflect her strong feminist views. Anna met and married Reverend George A.C. Cooper in 1877. Sadly, she was left a widow 2 years later. Driven by her desire to obtain an advanced degree, Anna enrolled in Oberlin College, one of the few colleges that admitted women of all colors. She obtained a master's degree in 1884. She spent most of her life as an educator. Her services as a teacher began in 1887. And in 1901, she became the second female principal in Washington, D.C., holding office at M Street High School for Negroes, the present Dunbar School. Notwithstanding, Mrs. Cooper believed attaining advanced degrees was important and going to college. As a crusader for higher education, she secured scholarships and admission for Black students at Harvard, Yale, and Brown universities. Near retirement age, she earned a PhD in Latin at the Sorbonne in France and published 2 historical works in French. In her later years, she established the Fraunhofen University in Washington, D.C., an evening college for adults who were employed during the day. And she serves as the Institute's president from 1929 to 1941. Some of her books she authored was A Voice from the South, which is a collection of her essays and speeches. One of her quotes are here listed on the side. "The cause of freedom is not the cause of a race or a sect, a party or a class. It is the cause of humankind, the very bright birthright of humanity." To our girls, she said, "Let our girls feel that we expect something more of them than that they merely look pretty and appear well in society. Only the Black woman can say when and where I enter in the quiet, undisputed dignity of my womanhood, without violence, and without suing or special patronage. Then and there, the whole Negro race enters with me.
And those words were very timely, as they are in the past, as what they are today. Now, women in the suffrage movement. African American women contributed to the early suffrage movement. These women were at the forefront of fighting for gender and racial rights. African American suffrage argued for social reform issues, ending racial discrimination, and the plight of disenfranchisement. And I never say that word right. So now, most of the women of the West came from oppressive and restrictive lives in the South. They wanted to feel the cheer and inspiration of meeting each other, gaining the courage and fresh life that comes from the mingling of congenial souls, of working for the same ends. It was vital for African American women to prepare their children for occupations that would be open to them without the sting of racial discrimination. One of these women that was fighting for social reform and equal rights was Elizabeth Piper Inslee. Elizabeth Piper Inslee, she was part of the Colorado movement. She was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts, to freed parents Philip F. and Jane Piper. In New Bedford, African Americans were politically active. She received her education at one of these schools. In 1870, Elizabeth studied in Germany and in Switzerland. After returning from Europe, Elizabeth established a circulating library and started to teach school. Now, in September 4th of 1882, Elizabeth married Newell H. Inslee, who was also a teacher. And on September 4th, actually a little bit schools and in different states. They moved to the District of Columbia, where they were on the faculty at Howard University in 1882. Later, the Inslees moved to Mississippi, where Mrs. Inslee taught at Acorn University, and her husband became a professor. In 1887, the Inslees moved to Denver. Tragically, Mr. Inslee died at age 36 years old, leaving Mrs. Inslee a widow and raising two children, Roger and Charlotte. Now, during her time in Denver, Mrs. Inslee became involved in women's rights. She was one of the founding members of the Colorado Equal Suffrage Association here in Denver. One of her, the people that she had actually went to the meeting, she came from Massachusetts only. So it seemed like they were very liberal out there at that time. And when they came here to the West, they really did want to further the progress of women's rights. Now, she was elected treasurer of this organization in 1906 and became the Denver correspondent to the Woman's ERA Journal of the National Association of Colored Women. Working with other women, Mrs. Inslee and Mrs. Ida DePriest created the Colored Women's Republican Club and successfully worked with Black males to elect the first Black legislature, Joseph Stewart. Toward the end of her life, Mrs. Inslee held the position of president of the Lincoln Douglas Sanitarium Association. She lived to be 72 years old. Roger Inslee, her son, drowned in Hill City, Kansas in 1915 and preceded her in death. In 1919, her daughter, Charlotte Inslee, she married and worked diligently with the Colorado Women's Club in Denver and the Colored Colorado Republican Club too. And I noticed that now they wouldn't say colored or Negro, but during that time it was perfectly acceptable to use those terms. Now, Mrs. Inslee passed away on February 23rd, 1919. She's buried at Riverside Cemetery in Denver, Colorado. Now, Mrs. Inslee was one of those warriors who loved to write, and she loved to express her feelings with speeches. And what you'll see here is a portion of her speech after the first election in 1894. What I'd like to do is to kind of give a little framework, a different perspective on the speech. Now, during that time, the male population, or some of the male populations, did not agree with women having the vote. The first myth they had was males used against women voters were women do not know anything about politics. Now, what Mrs. Inslee said, women will study politics. This was proven by the great number of political study clubs formed during the past year. A populist woman who stumped the state says, politics was the theme of discussion morning, noon, and night. The women talked politics over the dishwashing and during their social calls. Politics has made them read and think more, and in new and different lines. The second myth was if women get the vote, they're not going to vote. They're too busy with cleaning and taking care of the household. Women will vote. The women of Colorado have demonstrated conclusively that they will. The third myth, women are scatterbrains. They will vote for anyone. What Mrs. Inslee said, they will generally vote straight. This fact was shown by the Republican women, though it may be that in this instance, they believed it necessary to do so in the interest of law and order. And during that time, as Eleise said, there was a lot of lynching and violence in the country, and that was their primary goal, was to alleviate all this violence against male and female, Black male and females there. Myth 4, women are not organized or intelligent to organize a campaign. It's too much for them to handle. There should be thorough and systematic organization of the women in all parties. They believed that organization was the most important thing to get things passed. And they actually created different clubs to make sure that they were organized to take on these elections. Now, some of the changes women wanted to do after the election was The Good Government Committee will now take steps to strengthen its force and organize more thoroughly for the municipal election of the spring. Newly women voters worked to have a secret ballot instead of the Australian ballot that was used in 1894. And I thought that was pretty interesting that during that time, the ballots were open and anyone could see who they voted for. So they wanted to change this out, and they wanted it to be independent and secretive. Now, the readers of the ERA will be interested to know what special part the colored women have taken in the election. Most of them have done admirable work in the interests of the Republican Party. They also formed clubs of their own to the legislature, although the majority of these brothers voted against women's enfranchisement. Okay. Now, another woman we have in Colorado that was very influential in the community was Mrs. Ida DePriest. Mrs. Ida Clark DePriest is one of the most valued women and have been a strong factor in all things pertaining to the progress and uplift to the Negro race. And this was a quote by the Denver Star in 1938. Ida was born in Kansas in 1869 to Father Dudley and Mary Clark. Her father was born in Missouri, and her mother was born in Kentucky. 3 of her siblings were born before the end of the Civil War. Ida, Sarah, Herbert, and Darius were born after the Civil War. By the time Ida was born, the family had moved from Missouri to Kansas, Wyandotte County. Her father worked as a laborer. And in 1880, the family moved to Denver, Colorado, living in the river bottoms. There's evidence that perhaps Dudley's brother, Edward, may have traveled to Colorado also. Within 5 years, Dudley Clark had secured a job as a janitor. Dudley Jr. worked as a table waiter. And during that time, those were really good positions to have, actually. The family moved from the river bottom to 24th and Blake Street. And graduated with honors. They said that she was a brilliant intellectual and a powerful speaker. Ida met and married Richard K. DePriest by 1891. Richard was born around 1858 now in Alabama, as was his parents. They had 2 children. One died, and Claude H. was born in 1895, and he lived to be a fireman here in Colorado. Elizabeth and Ida founded the Colorado Women's Republican Club in Denver after the women got the right to vote. She served as a clerk under Colorado's Secretary of State. She had to resign because of racial animosity. But she did work in the office of the Election Commission in Denver on voter registration in 1916. Now, I'd like to talk just a little bit about the Colorado State Federation of Colored Women's Clubs. During that time, the clubs worked together to organize it as a social club, as a political club, as a club that had many departments in it. Now, Elizabeth Inslee of Denver, she issued a call early in the spring of 1904 to the club women to meet in Colorado Springs in June to form a state federation at Payne Chapel Church. In response to the call, 8 clubs were created as charter members of the federation. Their club motto was "Lifting as we climb." Now, these clubs work within different departments. Some of the departments were under women's suffrage, patriotism, education, conditions in rural life, music, literature, and art, and it goes on and on and on. But each club was organized in a way that they needed to pay their dues, and the dues went to the National Association to help fight lynching, and also in later years to create a daycare and also a home where single women can go to. And actually, the daycare center is still in existence here in Denver, Colorado. It's the George Washington Carver School in Northeast Denver. And it was very interesting with the center. A lot of times what they did was they put on different types of fundraising events. And it was interesting seeing how $100 was raised by each of the club members. They put the money together, ended up, as they said, paying off the mortgage within a short period of time. Now, here's the map of the women's suffrage movement across the country. And this map just gave a little bit of an insight on which states had already started. They approved the votes where women could vote in white, and in black, it was the states that still were holding on. And it was interesting to note that in Canada, they were having the same movement, and a lot of the territories were still beginning to change so that that the women were able to receive the vote there. And this map was issued in right around 1916. So just to summarize some things, African American women fought alongside of white women for equal rights from the very beginning. Many African American women also fought for universal rights by fighting to end violence and Jim Crow laws. After getting the vote, Colorado African American women joined forces with white women to form clubs and helped elect many Republicans to state and federal to states and federal representatives to Congress. And this concludes our presentation. And we can go ahead and give it back to Keith if you all have any questions.
Well, thank you both so much. But yeah, let's open the floor. Does anybody have any questions that you'd like answered? Oh, a few people have shown up while we've been in the presentation mode there. So yeah, go ahead, unmute yourself and feel free to ask if you have a question. Well, let me go ahead and ask then, if you don't mind, what that George Washington Carver Daycare Center, do you know what year that was built?
Well, the the original George Washington Carver Center was built in a house on 23rd and Clarkson, and it was, I think it was in 1923. It was 1923, about that time. And they moved it to a different location on 23rd and Franklin Street, and that's where it's located now.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Okay.
Anybody else? Questions?
Yeah, I think it's actually Humboldt, 23rd and Humboldt.
Humboldt,
Yeah,
yes,
Humboldt.
yes.
Yeah, and it's still there today. Many,
Mhm.
many children have gone through that school.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Mhm.
I am curious if the Black women who fought for the vote, if they had the same difficulties as the white women. I know this year there's a gal up in Loveland who's trying to convince the federal government that we need a sculpture in honor of women getting the vote. And I just kind of wondered, it was so brutal on the white women, were they that brutal to the Black women also?
Yes. And it's in Colorado, it being a Western state, it's unique because women in many ways were more respected in the West. They their contribution to survival was viewed a whole lot different than in the East. The South, of course, voting was difficult on anyone of color who wanted to vote. You know, they had poll taxes that you had to pay and things like this. This went on for years. And it started a whole lot earlier than we realized. As early as the 1700s, men were paying poll tax.
Oh.
So when the vote came for men, they still had to pay these poll taxes. For women, their husbands may have been a barrier for them. You know, if their husband did not feel like they should go vote, then that was a domestic issue that women had to deal with. And I'm sure it did exist. But yes, I do believe for both races of women or all women had this. We're scatterbrained. We don't know enough to vote.
And yes, also, especially in right around, before the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment here in Colorado, white and Black women joined together to try to change the way that the state was run. And that was one of the reasons why they had the colored women's clubs, because they wanted to get a group of people together. And then the white women's clubs, which were here in Colorado too, they joined together, band together to elect the Republicans at that time. And so it was difficult, but they were successful in the after they received the vote. They were successful in electing some of the candidates that they wanted to help them to be able to get their issues met. So. So it's a little bit easier than in the South, like Eleise said. It was a little bit, but it was still pretty difficult too. There was.
Anybody else have questions or comments that you'd like to say before we move on? No?
Hi, my name's Liz.
Oh.
I just wanted to quickly to thank you, Linda and Eleise, for doing all of this important work. And I am so grateful to be able to listen and learn from you. And I know that I'm not alone in that. And so I just really, really appreciate it. I'm so sad that right now the reenactments aren't being able, I don't know if you guys, maybe that is my question, when that's going to start up again, 'cause I'm excited to see those. But I just want to really express my gratitude because this is just amazing. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah,
Thanks,
hopefully
Liz.
very soon we'll be
Very
able to
soon,
start.
Liz, as soon as, you know, we can meet without being sick and making anyone sick, we
Right.
can't wait to do it. We're trying to figure out how to do it outside. More room.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there resources available that you would recommend for adults, but also for children, like through the African American Black West History Museum or Blair Caldwell Library? Where are the best places to find resources that could be shared with other people or with children?
The Blair Caldwell Library is an excellent resource. They do have a lot of African American books, and yes, and we have a small resource there at the museum too, where you can look and look about the African American experience here in Colorado.
Do you have information specific to Black suffragettes or suffragists?
Well, I have a resource, but and it's pretty good resource. It was Black Woman in White America by Lerner. And yes, and that's an excellent resource to go to. And it does it gives a lot of information about the movement all across the country. So it's not concentrated just in the West. Yeah.
Great. When you all do reenactments, do you have people or actors who play these suffragists?
Well, we're starting. I was myself. I'm going to. Well, Eleise can probably explain a little bit more about the play that we were supposed to have. You can explain it, Eleise.
We had a reenactment skit that we were going to show in March, and it was called Give Us the Vote. And it was a reenactment of an actual voting rights rally in 1892. And our speaker that day was supposed to be Mrs. Inslee, played by Linda Burke-Brown.
Okay.
And we had invited Liz Matthews' group of impromptu. They do improvisation, and they were going to come and join with us, and we were going to all be in costume. So hopefully, you know, like I said, probably next year, when this kind of calms down enough, you will see us again. We are going to still do this. This is just way too much fun not to do this.
Right. Well, thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for shifting to make this happen for us. We really do appreciate it. Let me mention one question in the chat. Do you think that Black women still struggle with being able to vote today? Are there time constraints, etc., that cause problems?
Yes. Yes. I would have to say yes, because of voter suppression that's going on in this country. And we have to, well, it's with everyone, but we have to double check and make sure that we're still registered to vote, because in different states and counties, they have been taking voters off the roll. So I have to say yes.
We still suffer with the constitutional three-fifths compromise that was done while we have the Electoral College. It was originally designed so that the slave owners would be able to have an advantage in voting. So if you owned enslaved people, we counted for a portion of a person. And when you put that together, that allows you extra votes. And that's partially why we have the Electoral College. We want to move to a popular vote. That's why we have delegates and all that. That is all discombobulated into enslavement and the advantage to Southern people. Also, the Civil Rights Bill comes up for approval every 25 years. Why I am not sure, but it should be forever. But every 25 years, that comes up. So yes, the voter suppression, we've gone in to vote. I've actually gone in to vote and they not find my name, or one of my friends' name does not appear on the poll, and they've been voting their whole lives. So yes, it still happens to people of color, to really poor people too, because we're the disenfranchised in this, and that, you know, not just Black people, but people who are disenfranchised, who have no real voice.
All right, well, thank you. Are there any other questions that anybody wants to jump in with? Okay, well, Eleise and Linda, thank you both so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I just want to personally apologize to both of you for the trouble in getting this scheduled. I'm glad we could make it happen after, yeah, well, we got it, is what we'll say. But thank you so much for being able to deal with all this, and for shifting to Zoom when we'd planned on doing this in person originally. And I want to mention to everybody, I don't know that it got mentioned, when you guys are reopened at the Black American West Museum and Heritage Center, right at basically California and Downing is where your institution is located. Am I correct? It's been a little bit since
Yes.
then. Okay, all right.
30th in California.
Okay.
3091 California Street.
There we go.
Yes.
Okay.
Across from the light rail.
Yep. Okay. All right. So you can put that in Google and find it, all of you out there. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to open it up one more time just in case anyone missed it. Anyone have any questions you want to throw out before we start logging off?
I just want to say thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks. Thanks.
All right. Well,
Thank you, Mary. It was nice to meet you.
Oh, it's nice to meet y'all.
I hope to see you again.
Yes.
Thank you, Tessa, Shannon, Angela,
Thank you.
Bruce.
and I hope we've got people who are logging off so they can go study up on things that they learned here, because
Of course.
I got some
Yes.
things I want to look up now too.
Hi, Wilma.
Thank you
Thank
so
Thank
much.
you both, ladies.
Thank
Oh,
you,
you're
Wilma.
welcome.
Have a good day.
You too.
You too.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you all for
Oh, my
coming.
pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate
We've
it.
enjoyed this. I hope someone got something from it.
Yes.
I'm sure they did. I know I did. And I will touch base with you ladies just to make sure everything's good. I recorded, I know you both did too. So we'll kind of make sure that we all got the recordings we're looking for. And if
Okay.
not, we can share. So
Okay. Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Keith.
thank you so
Thanks.
much. Have a great day.
All
And,
right.
and good
Have a
luck
great day.
with your reopening whenever it happens.
Yes. Thank you.
The same with you,
We're all,
Keith.
yep, all kind of in the same boat with that one. So good luck.
Yes.
All right.
Thanks. Take care.
Yep,
All
you
right.
too. Bye. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Linda.